So, horror remakes have built quite the reputation for themselves, and not necessarily a great one. More often than not, they tend to feel pretty unnecessary. Think of a studio cashing in on a beloved property without any real understanding of what made it special in the first place or why people hold nostalgia for it. This then ultimately comes with watered down scares, retreads of plots that we've seen before, and stories that leave you wondering why the film even exists to begin with. But every now and then, a remake comes along and thrives. Whether that's due to genuine quality or just being the best of a bad bunch is a debate that we could have, and 2013's Evil Dead is definitely the former, with a clear stylized format and a story that feels as though it actually has something worth saying. This is most definitely the gold standard for a horror remake, and this is an opinion that is shared across many fans of this genre. It's the film that takes the bones of an original classic and transforms it into something new and dark, something that doesn't hold back. It respects the name that it comes with, but it doesn't chain itself to those foundations, and in doing so, it delivers one of the most punishing, intense horror experiences post-2010. What's without a doubt one of the biggest mistakes you'll see from these remakes is a desperation to emulate, which leads to the studio trying far too hard to be that original movie again. They'll get so caught up in recreating those iconic moments that they forget to actually give their movie substance. When that happens, it leads to 90% of these things feeling like hollow imitations. Evil Dead is the perfect display of how not to do that. Instead of chasing the charm of Sam Raimi's iconic trilogy, it goes in the opposite direction, stripping away the camp, the humour and the self-awareness, leaning hard into pure, relentless horror. It still very much feels like Evil Dead, but it's not trying to be Evil Dead. It's not hitting you up with a wink, slipping you cheeky one-liners or goofy practical effects. Instead, it drags you into a night of sheer, unflinching terror. It's mean, it's violent, and it doesn't give you a second to breathe, carving out its own identity without disrespecting the seeds that birthed it. What really pushes this remake beyond being just good and into the upper threshold of greatness is the fact that even amongst all the brutality, there's something here worth dissecting. It has that substance that so many others lack, something that actually gives the story a little weight. This version anchors itself around one character, Mia, and her struggle that runs a lot deeper than just typical survival. From the very first scene, we're made aware that Mia isn't just here for a weekend getaway, she's here to get clean. The character is battling an addiction to heroin, and this is an intervention that has been put together by the people around her. The brilliance of this movie is how it then uses said addiction as a thematic undercurrent for everything that's about to happen in the next 90 minutes. The moment Mia starts to feel withdrawals, she's desperate to get out. She's shaky, she's paranoid, and she's seeing things, and in any other context, her friends may have believed her, but here, they chalk it up to the symptoms of her detox. So when she first encounters the evil in the woods and comes back justifiably traumatised, no one takes her seriously, and that's when the movie makes its tone abrasively clear. It's using the subject of demonic possession as a metaphor for drug addiction. The more that this evil takes of her, the less recognisable she becomes to her friends. She's dangerous, unpredictable, and they feel at times like they've lost her. It's exactly how addiction can feel to the people around you, and in a twisted way that brings an elevated nature to the franchise. Mia's struggle isn't only against this demon, she's fighting herself. By the time we reach the final act, when Mia quite literally has to claw her way out of the dirt and fight for her life, it becomes something else entirely. It's not only a horror climax, but a metaphorical rebirth of sorts. She faces her demon, she conquers it, and comes out on the other side clean. It's gruesome, it's messy, and hell, it's agonising, but she survives it all, and that's the brilliance of this thing. It weaponises its brutality to mirror that tragic struggle of addiction that so many people face. A large reason behind the emotional vulnerability of the character comes from the heartbreaking performance by Jane Levy. She's able to bring this dismal sense of feeling lost to the character. It's upsetting to see the way that she's so easily dismissed, and she conveys all of the required emotion with a depressing air that just leaves you feeling overall pretty uncomfortable. She makes this feel like there's real fatal stakes. She gives the story life, meaning it's its own story built meticulously with care around a character arc that hits a lot harder than you'd expect. The film's brutality also serves this because it's not just violence for the sake of it, it's violence that actually serves a purpose. This movie doesn't hold back, at all. This is a nasty 90 minutes, and I don't mean that in the typical, ooh, it's a gory horror movie kind of way. I mean this is viscerally unsettling to watch. The violence is prolonged, relentless, and designed solely with the intention of making you squirm in your seat. And if that wasn't enough, almost all of it is practical effects. Fede Álvarez, director of the movie, made it clear from the start that he wanted as little CGI present as possible. Everything from the self-mutilation to the dismemberments to the literal raining blood in the finale was practically done. What this does, and I feel that this sort of thing is sometimes undervalued by a handful of people when weighing up CGI to practical effects, is let you feel the weight of every injury. You feel that grit that comes with all the brutal moments, and there's an unflinching sense of realism to the horror, partly responsible for why this remake feels so raw and unfiltered. What I also really respect is that there's never a point where the brutality feels gratuitous. Earlier I mentioned that Mia's possession acts as a metaphor for drug addiction, but the physical toll that she is tormented with is an extension of that. Her withdrawals were already a messy, painful experience, so when the horror takes over, the physical torment feels like a natural progression of things rather than just becoming horror for the sake of it. However, no one is exempt from that physical trauma. Everyone in this film suffers. The nail gun scene, the arm amputation, the box cutter to the tongue. It's all so uncomfortably real. There's no break, no chance to catch your breath. The movie wants you to feel like you're trapped in the cabin with the characters. That's something that you never really see in most horror remakes. Most of them are afraid to go that far, perhaps for a desire to meet certain age ratings or something. They'll clean up the violence and make sure that it's palatable enough for mainstream audiences, but Evil Dead practically spits in the face of that mindset. It goes all in, and that's why it stands out. It's a remake that relishes in being horrifying, and that's more than refreshing, it's essential. The brilliance of Evil Dead lies in the ability it has to keep the essence of what made the original so iconic. That claustrophobia, the relentless violence, that sense of isolation. But it expands those elements into something deeper and becomes more engaging for the audience. Most horror remakes are made to capitalise on a name, not do something new with it. But Evil Dead stands on its own as a terrifying, brutal reimagining of the original classic. I've seen some people say that this is one of the best in the franchise, and honestly, I could agree with that. This feels like Sam Raimi's original vision, realised with a budget worthy of the project. The spectacle of the original Evil Dead was the chaos of it all. Here, there's something more at stake. Mia's addiction is the emotional backbone of the story, and the demonic forces at play become a physical manifestation of the internal struggle she faces. It's a film that takes the original's over-the-top horror and anchors it in something genuine. Mia's progression from vulnerability to survival is the ultimate heart of the film. Her addiction is woven into the very fabric of this story, rather than being background noise that eventually just gets forgotten about. It doesn't shy away from showing how brutal and painful that journey will be, and it uses the elements of supernatural horror to amplify that feeling. When Mia fights her way back from possession, it becomes a battle of control for her own life, her own future. That's what makes this remake so fundamentally different from others. It comes with an undeniable emotional weight that ties the violence to a real human experience, rather than relying on gore and shock value. And let's not undervalue that approach to gore. Evil Dead is able to elevate the gore rather than just being overly sensational with the amount of blood on screen. When Mia is brutally attacked, it's a symbol of struggle. The extended sequences of violence are visceral, uncomfortable, and yes, often difficult to watch, but that's the entire point of it. The rawness and physicality of the horror mirror Mia's inner conflict, and it adds a layer of realism to the character. The grotesque yet realistic practical effects further ground the supernatural within this world. These are real people going through real suffering, and the film makes sure that you're feeling every ounce of that. Evil Dead takes the ideas of possession, isolation, and violence from the original and explores them in a deeper, more meaningful way. It asks questions about addiction, about personal redemption and survival. The horror isn't any old sequence of scares, it's a reflection of the human condition, and that makes it resonate more than the usual mindless gorefest. By the time we reach the bloody finale, it's less about watching an Evil Dead movie and more watching a character who has both literally and metaphorically been through hell and emerged stronger from it. There's an undoubtable catharsis in the chaos. It's a reimagining of an iconic title that wants to make you feel something, to understand the pain and the fight that these characters are going through. Evil Dead shows how a remake can actually justify its own existence by offering something different. It stays true to the spirit of the classic while really pushing some boundaries on what's okay and what isn't. It takes the all too familiar horror tropes, makes them raw, and connects them to a personal human struggle. In a landscape that was flooded with constant unnecessary remakes, Evil Dead proves that a remake can be so much more than a cash grab or a lazy retelling. It can be something bold, something new, something memorable. So whether you're a die-hard fan of the original and the franchise, or someone who's just getting into this series, Evil Dead is well worth the time and deserves more than just a surface level watch. It deserves that recognition as one of the few horror remakes out there that's able to both honour the predecessor and also surpass it in its own way. And given how impressive and downright iconic these movies are, I think that's really high praise, and yet I feel so confident in saying that.